What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2022. Now, keep in mind, this is the 4G version of the Moto G Stylus. This is not the Moto G Stylus 5G. That is a completely different phone. But even then, of course, these phones are in slightly different price ranges. But if you are on the fence about buying something super entry level like the Moto G Play, or spending a bit more and getting something slightly more premium like the Moto G Stylus, then this is definitely the video for you. Now, as always, if you do want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Play, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with the 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Moto G Stylus, we're getting a 6.8-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display. This phone has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 396, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So clearly here, first of all, the Moto G Stylus is quite a bit larger at, again, 6.8 inches versus only 6.5. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, this is definitely something to keep in mind. In addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 20:9 with the Moto G Play, the Moto G Stylus does have a slightly taller and more narrow form factor, and on one hand, the difference really isn't that huge. But on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus, because of this, you are going to get a nicer, more immersive experience in landscape mode. And if you're doing something like browsing the web, scrolling through social media, stuff like that, with a taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. And then finally, with the 1080p resolution, of course, versus 720p with the Moto G Play, the Stylus does have a sharper, nicer looking image. So in general, again, if you are going to be on your phone a bit more, whether you're doing more simple stuff like web browsing, where the image quality doesn't matter a whole lot, or if you're going to be doing stuff like watching videos, no matter what the case may be, if you really are looking for a phone that has a super nice display, then you will be much better off with the Moto G Stylus. Now, when it comes to storage, with the Moto G Play, this phone has 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Moto G Stylus, this phone has 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. So this is a huge difference here. Honestly, I almost forgot how much of a difference this really is, with the Moto G Stylus having quite a bit more storage than the Moto G Play. So on one hand, with the Moto G Play, honestly, I feel like for most people, 32GB is just not going to be enough, especially in this day and age with stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger. So unless you're a really light occasional user who has maybe like 5 apps on your phone, maybe some photos and videos you can easily put on a microSD card, and really not a whole lot else, then in that case, the Moto G Play will at least be acceptable. But again, I feel like for most people, that's not going to be the case. Most people like to have at least a decent amount of apps. So in almost every situation, when it comes to storage, the Moto G Stylus will have a huge advantage. And that's really one of the main drawbacks of entry-level phones like this, because with the Moto G Play, this phone is really not unique when it comes to that. I want to say most phones under maybe like $150 are usually only going to have 32GB anyway. So yeah, for an entry-level phone, this is definitely not unusual. But when you compare this to something like more of a mid-range phone, pretty much any device like the Moto G Stylus that is going to be a bit higher end in general is going to have quite a bit more storage. So if you are going to be using your phone a lot for a bunch of different things, then yeah, I would definitely say, especially in this situation, the Moto G Stylus with so much more storage is going to have a huge advantage here. For security features, both phones of course do have fingerprint scanners. With the Moto G Play, it's right here on the back, and with the Moto G Stylus, it's on the power key. In addition to this, keep in mind, the Moto G Stylus does have Face Unlock, whereas unfortunately the Moto G Play doesn't. Now, I feel like people usually don't use Face Unlock as opposed to a fingerprint scanner, but of course, it's always nice to have multiple options. So if that is important to you, then you might want to go with the Moto G Stylus. But again, for most people, I feel like the fingerprint scanner is going to be perfectly fine. And again, of course, the Moto G Play does have one, so that's always good. But starting with the Moto G Play, let's give these fingerprint scanners a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Stylus. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners worked real well. So that's definitely nice to see. Now for the camera setups here, both phones do have nice looking hole punch designs for the front facing cameras. With the Moto G Play, we got 5 megapixels. And with the Moto G Stylus, this one has 16. Then on the back, with the Moto G Play, we got a triple camera setup with the 16 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus, we got another triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So although both phones do have triple camera setups, the Moto G Stylus having an ultra-wide camera does have an advantage here. So if you do want an ultra-wide camera, keep in mind, unfortunately, the Moto G Play doesn't have one. But if you don't care, then feature-wise at least, either phone will be perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to photo quality, you can probably guess the Moto G Stylus is quite a bit better. This is really true mid-range phone territory. So when it comes to camera quality, I feel like for most people, a phone like the Moto G Stylus is really all you're gonna need. Sure, there are much higher end phones that are still gonna take much better photos, but I feel like in normal real life settings like Instagram, for example, Snapchat, sending photos to friends and family, stuff like that, you're really not gonna need something like a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. So in general, in most cases, if you're really looking for a phone that has a good camera, for most people, I do think the Moto G Stylus will definitely be good enough. On the other hand, with the Moto G Play, the camera really isn't terrible, and I do think for what it is, this phone does take some pretty decent photos too. That being said though, between the two, it's definitely no contest. The Moto G Stylus is quite a bit better in pretty much every way. So if the camera is really important to you, definitely keep this in mind. That being said though, I do want to point out that with the Moto G Play, if you're really just taking a couple photos every now and then, again, the quality is definitely not that bad. And even for something like an occasional Instagram photo, I do think it will at least get the job done. So if you're not too concerned about the camera, but you just need something decent that works, then yeah, in that case, the Moto G Play will still be fine. But again, if you want the better camera between the two, the Moto G Stylus will have a huge advantage. To give you an idea of what these cameras can do, here's a picture taken with the Moto G Play. Sure, on one hand, not the best picture ever, and if you are taking a ton of pictures, you are most likely going to want something a bit better. But again, for what it is, considering this is a really affordable entry-level device, I do think it is at least okay, especially for more occasional use, where you maybe need something that works, but not necessarily the best camera ever. Here's a picture taken with the Moto G Stylus, and again, between the two, I would definitely say the Moto G Stylus has a huge advantage. So again, if you are going to be taking a lot of pictures and the photo quality is a bit more important to you, then this is definitely something to keep in mind. When it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Play, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor. With the Moto G Stylus, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G88. So for overall performance, there's definitely quite a difference here. On one hand, with the Moto G Play, even for an entry-level phone, this phone is honestly pretty slow. So unless you're doing really basic activities and you're not really going to be using your phone a whole lot in general, you're most likely going to want something a bit faster. That being said, of course, if you're really using your phone for the bare minimum, then it will at least get the job done. On the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus, despite still not really being the fastest phone itself, the performance is quite a bit better. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, then you are going to be a lot better off with the Moto G Stylus. But keep in mind, even this phone itself really isn't that fast, especially compared to a lot of the 5G phones, for example. So if performance is really a main priority for you, then I feel like in general, you can do a lot better than these phones for honestly not really a whole lot more, if any. But that being said, again, between the two, if you're really just looking for something for more basic activities, then on one hand, if you're really not going to be using your phone a whole lot, either one is going to be fine. But if you are going to be on your phone a bit more doing stuff like web browsing, social media, watching videos, and things like that, again, the Moto G Stylus will have a huge advantage. Now, I did run benchmark tests on these phones using Geekbench 5. And here are the results I got. So as you can see here again, the Moto G Stylus has a huge advantage being quite a bit faster. So if you are going to be on your phone a bit more, then this is definitely going to be a big difference. But again, on the other hand, with the Moto G Play, even though this obviously is not a very fast phone, for really basic occasional use, it still will at least get the job done. For the batteries, both phones have 5,000 mAh batteries, so if you are looking for a device that has really good battery life, you're not going to go wrong with either phone. If you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need something that's really going to last all day, either phone is going to be a great choice for that, and aside from having a bunch of battery life per charge. Down the road, as the batteries degrade, which of course all batteries do, with a 5,000 mAh battery, as opposed to something like a 3,000 mAh battery, these phones are still going to last quite a bit longer. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, then either phone is going to be great for that too. Now when it comes to software, with the Moto G Play, we are getting Android 12. On one hand, is kind of too bad, considering this is a 2023 phone. But that being said, for whatever reason at this point, as of the recording of this video, in March of 2023, not a whole lot of phones that aren't Samsungs in this price range at least have Android 13 anyway, so it's not like it's unusual or anything. Now with the Moto G Stylus, as of right now, this phone does currently have Android 11. I feel like it's gonna get Android 12 really soon. But again, as you can see, Android 11 right here, and I check for updates like every day on this phone. So I don't really know why this phone, despite me getting it factory unlocked, still has Android 11, whereas phones like the Moto G Pure and the Moto G Power somehow got the update to Android 12 already. And this phone is a bit higher end than those ones. But regardless, I feel like eventually the Moto G Stylus will at least get Android 12. I don't know about 13, I kind of doubt it. So in general, between the two, if the software is a bit more important to you, the Moto G Play will have a bit of an advantage. But if you're not too concerned about it, then keep in mind the Moto G Stylus is still perfectly fine. I mean, Android 11 runs decently well on on this phone, so it's not really that big a deal. But of course, if having the latest version of Android is really that important to you, you're probably going to want to go with a different phone anyway, because phones like Samsung's, for example, definitely have much better software support anyway. In addition to this, unfortunately, neither phone has NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you are going to have to get a completely different phone. Now, especially with the Moto G Stylus, but even with the Moto G Play, I mean, this is a new phone. Seeing that neither phone has NFC is definitely disappointing, because at this point, contactless mobile payment services are so popular and widely used that I feel like at this point in 2023, any smartphone, regardless of the price range, really should have NFC. So again, keep in mind, if you do want that feature, or maybe you don't currently use it, but you want the option to in the future, you are going to want to get a phone that does have NFC. But of course, if you don't use tap and pay and you don't see yourself ever using it, then this obviously is not going to matter anyway. And speaking of other features, obviously the Moto G Stylus, as the name suggests, does actually have a stylus, whereas the Moto G Play doesn't. And not only this, but unless you have T-Mobile or Metro, in which case you can get the TCL Stylus 5G, pretty much the only other option for non-flagship phones that have styluses is going to be a Moto G Stylus, whether it's the 4G version, 5G version, 2021, 2022, whatever it is. When it comes to mid-range phones that have styluses, definitely not a whole lot of options out there, so definitely keep that in mind. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now honestly, this is probably not surprising, but in pretty much every way, the Moto G Stylus is definitely the better device here. That being said though, despite this, it might not actually make the most sense for everyone. On one hand, if you're looking for an affordable 4G phone and you're really going to be on your phone a lot, maybe you're playing some mobile games, watching a lot of YouTube videos, browsing the web, using social media, pretty much all that kind of stuff, and maybe you're taking a lot of pictures too, or you want a stylus, in that kind of situation, the Moto G Stylus of course is definitely going to be a much better option, because again, this is a better phone in every way. That being said though, if you really are just looking for something super basic and affordable, and you're really not going to be using your phone a whole lot, I do think in that kind of situation, despite really not having the best performance, the Moto G Play is still a perfectly fine option. I mean, even though it's not a very fast phone, for really basic activities like occasional web browsing, watching a video here and there, and just using the phone as a phone, it will still get the job done. And again, even with the camera, while not being nearly as good as the Moto G Stylus, it's still not terrible. So for the occasional Instagram post or Snapchat and stuff like that, it still will be perfectly fine. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2022. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where we'll be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Stylus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.